quietly salute an untold number of people who aren't on the list. They recognize firefighters, police, and others who died or fell ill after exposure to toxins unleashed in the wreckage. Karen Pfeffer's husband, firefighter Ray Pfeffer, died in 2017 of cancer. It developed after he spent months searching the rubble for remains. She says the new 9/11 Memorial Glade gives families like hers a place to think about everyone. Linda Perry, WBAI News, New York.
Welcome to Waking Up. I'm Juliana Forlano.
Good morning with King Downing.
Good morning, King. We made it today.
We made it as dark as
What
it
happened?
was.
It's suddenly dark out in the morning.
No.
Oh, my God. It's raining out there. Just going to start it. If it hasn't started where you are, it's starting in about 10 minutes. We'll talk to you about the weather. We'll talk to you about Google and the antitrust lawsuit that is coming up against them. And we're going to be talking with Professor Richard Wolff as we do. Luckily, get the chance to do every so often, so stay with us. Good morning, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Long Island, Connecticut, Westchester. Where else are we? In all parts, radical across the country.
And we had some people from how far away that
New
called
Orleans?
in? Once. Yeah, right. Our New Orleans people.
I know I've got a listener named Viv out on the far west coast, the San Juan Islands. She occasionally lets me know she's listening. So, it's the New York expats. We got the Virginia person who calls in. Yeah. Well, anyway, we can't give you the entire nation's weather, but here in New York, in case you're missing the weather in New York, it's 69 degrees. It is super humid out there. It's literally 90% humidity. My mother used to make a joke. It's 90% humidity out there, but really it is 90% humidity. So, forget about styling your hair. Just leave. Headband day. It's going to be raining at about starting in just a few minutes in certain parts of our listening area. Patterson, Yonkers, Westchester, and Queens are going to get a little bit of a sprinkle, not too bad. It's moving across. You're probably already seeing it if you're driving in New Jersey. And, for the rest of the day, we're looking at a mix of sun and clouds by afternoon, high 78. And the chance of rain is 80% this morning. And then tomorrow, sunshine and clouds mixed, high 89 degrees. So if you're thinking that it's September and you can switch your clothes over from your small closet to your, don't do it. Give it another little while. Wear your tank tops. You'll be fine. Okay, so we noticed that it was incredibly dark out today. The sun is not rising now until 6:32 a.m. and it sets at 7:12. It seemed like maybe the sun knew it was Labor Day and then all of a sudden it decided that it seems very dark in the morning all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's going south. And it's at 2 minutes a day. I think that's about how it works.
That's
so
fast, it seems.
It'll be an hour a month from now. It'll be an hour darker.
Oh, no.
That's not good.
Well, waking up was a little more challenging when it's dark. And sometimes I get that wintertime depression, it's called seasonal affective disorder. And I found that I bought all these lights, a whole lighting scheme for my house, where if you buy these light bulbs, they're called full spectrum bulbs. I'm not selling bulbs or whatever, but if you buy these bulbs and they make it seem like something about the sun's rays are at 12 noon, because it's the angle of the sun not being around and not necessarily the length of the sunlight. I've done my research. I've listened to Gary Null about this. He knows things. So I got those light bulbs. But today I got this new alarm clock. Stick with me. It's supposed to do a sunrise, and you can I set it for 30 minutes before I was going to wake up at about 5:15. So it's nice. Nice thing. The problem is I bought it on Amazon, and it won't work unless you hook it up to your Alexa or your Google Home, right? I didn't know that. It didn't say that on the box. This is like a smart home appliance, and it didn't say that. It won't really work properly. I mean, anyone who buys this kind of light is someone who's probably sensitive to light in the first place. So it has this flashing thing that unless you hook it up to your internet, what is it doing in my bedroom?
It's letting the NSA know in Langley, Virginia, what time you're getting up and how many times you hit the snooze button. That's critical information.
Isn't Alexa doing that all by herself? I mean,
Well, she's a snitch.
I occasionally unplug Alexa because I don't know. Somehow I have a fear that she's going to wake up in the middle of the night and be like, Juliana, or just, freak me out somehow, or give, so there's that. But it kind of got to me, the fact that you can't even they didn't tell you when you bought it that it was, it had to be hooked up to Google to work really properly. You can kind of work it, but I haven't done it so far. And this, I think, connects to the story that we're having Professor Wolff on to talk about.
So you're going to send it back? Or are you going to
No,
keep it?
I'm not. I can't. Who has time to send things back? That's how I don't know. I'm going to keep it and keep the flashing light off, or I'll probably just succumb because I think that's how they're doing it these days. They make it so you just kind of knuckle under because who has time for every little thing that you have to deal with to fight? Anyone else feel that way? You can call us 212-209-2877. But, corporate interests are not in our best interest these days. And so that's nothing new. But it's connected, right, to the thing that I wanted to talk about with Professor Wolff. Here, let me pull up this. So 50 U.S. states and territories have announced a broad antitrust investigation of Google. And I think this is good. Somehow, Google wants my alarm clock. Google wants to know what's going on with my alarm clock. It just seems slightly invasive. But, so these attorney generals from 50 U.S. states have just announced yesterday that an antitrust investigation of Google, which is going to be embarking on a wide-ranging review of this tech giant, thank goodness, that, by the way, Democrats and Republicans said may threaten competition, consumers, and the continued growth of the web. We're already seeing that. You kind of have to be in with Google in order to be effective on the internet. This is kind of important. Google dominates the buyer side, the seller side, the auction side, and the video side with YouTube, by the way. I used to have a very successful YouTube site, and I used to make some money off of it. I was doing political satire called Absurdity Today. The old ones are up there if you want to go check it out. That's kind of how I got into this job. And all of a sudden, they just pulled the plug. And you couldn't make money off your ads anymore. And you couldn't, I didn't really run that many ads, but I would do like by viewers or things like that. And they just pulled the plug. So they just pulled the plug on basically what is small business. And Google can do that.
What reason did they give? They just told you that's it? We just changed it?
Facebook did the same thing.
Yeah.
They so people who have relied on these platforms to build a business, sunk a lot of time and energy into that. That's it. It's rough. Anyway, some of the attorneys general appeared to raise additional complaints about Google, ranging from the way the company processes and ranks search results to the extent to which it may not fully protect our personal information. Their early rebukes raised the stakes for Google, threatening a top-to-bottom scrutiny of the sprawling business beyond just the ads. Sean Reyes, the Republican Attorney General of Utah, says that there's nothing wrong with being a dominant player when it's done fairly. He said there is a presumption of innocence in such an investigation, but still said there is a pervasiveness to complaints about Google's business practices. And Jeff Landry, a Republican from Louisiana, which is interesting because these aren't people with necessarily progressive values at their back, said that we're here because there's an absolutely existential threat to our virtual marketplace. Now, Google is declining to comment even to the Washington Post. They certainly didn't return my calls. Anyway, the probe marks the latest regulatory headache for Google and the rest of Silicon Valley, which has faced growing criticism and widening state and federal scrutiny into whether they've grown too big and too powerful. They've definitely undermined rivals, if you ask me, and they result in costlier and worse service for web users. Just like this is why we have antitrust legislation. And after this break, we're going to be talking to Professor Wolff about exactly this and about how this affects our things. Thoughts, King?
Well, the first was that maybe if you had actually programmed your alarm clock to Google, they might have returned your call.
Thank you.
And the other thing is
that's what they're waiting for. Or they just
funny.
talk to me through the clock.
So
Wake up.
So we think alike, which could be a scary thing here, because this was one of the stories. No, it wasn't going to be the message, but I was trying to dig it up in time. But the other part of this is that 14 AGs are also going after Facebook at the same time. That Especially at the time that 50 are going after Google. It's up to 14 now going after Facebook. So maybe they'll take them all.
Do you know
out.
if Tish James is on board with this? They're not
Not
the city
sure.
ones; they're the state ones. State, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Well, we'll look into it.
we'll look
She's
into
state.
it. Well, I mean, there's 50. There's only 51 territories going Puerto Rico.
They're
Am I
all
wrong?
there. The only
So
ones that didn't get
everybody's
into it were the Puerto Ricans.
Okay,
and
yesterday,
Guam.
I picked this song out for you myself because although I wasn't born when it originally came out, it has been one of my favorites. I've been starting to look over some of my favorite songs, and hopefully some of y'all will remember this. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll be back with Professor Wolff right after this. Sweet Jane by the Velvet Underground. I hope that took you back, and I hope it helped wake you up. You're listening to Waking Up on WBAI 99.5 FM with Juliana.
And King.
And Juliana.
And King.
69 degrees outside right now. It is raining in some parts of the area. Light rain, nothing to worry about. It's going to end in about an hour from now, and then it's going to basically clear up, and we're going to have a nice day. It's going up to 78 degrees. It's our high. Tomorrow, we're looking at almost 90 degrees. So that's a little crazy. Hopefully, the humidity won't be as it is right now, 90%. 90% humidity, 90 degrees? No. Mm-mm. No. Mm-mm. No. Anyway, before the break, we were talking about how yesterday Attorney General for 50 U.S. states and territories announced that antitrust investigation of Google. It's going to be incredibly wide-ranging. A review of this tech giant just... Thank God it's finally coming under scrutiny, because for years it's been under fire for practices that threaten competition, consumers, and the continued growth of the web itself. This is not the first time Silicon Valley's been accused of not playing fair. But what is the actual impact these companies are having on our daily lives, and how can we stop it from continuing? Professor Wolff is back on Waking Up to, again, shed some light on this issue. Professor Wolff, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Juliana, my pleasure. Thank you.
Every other Tuesday is one of my favorite days on the show because I know you're going to be here, and I know I'm going to leave smarter than I came in.
That's very kind.
By the way,
Thank
we're
you.
working on a Wolf sound effect for you. I hope that's okay.
Fine. Fine. Just don't make it too much howling, that's all.
We won't. Well, it's going to be hard not to. But we think you'll love it. We'll work on it
Okay.
perfectly. So can you talk about, talk about the current investigation into Google and why this is all coming to a head now?
Well, there's a large part of me that wants to answer that question with the old phrase, same old, same old. Part of me, because I'm an economist and I study these things, can't quite get over the fact that this is the umpteenth time that an industry in the capitalist economic system finally achieves its greatest desire, and that is to have so few companies left in it that the few can get together and work things out and really make a killing. When you're a little business in capitalism, your hope is to make some money and to grow and plow your profits back in and all of that. But what you're really hoping for is that you'll be more successful than your competitors, and eventually you'll outdo them. They will fall by the wayside. You will buy the secondhand equipment they have to sell as they go out of business. You'll hire the workers that no longer have jobs in them. And pretty soon, many companies will shrink down to a very few, very big ones who are left. That's what competition does. It produces the winners and the losers. And typically in capitalism, the winners eat the losers. That is, they absorb them. And then when you only have 2 or 3 or 4 left, then they get together. Their executives get together on the golf course or in the boardroom or wherever those people go, and they cut a deal, and they say, look, we are now the only ones left, 2 or 3 of us, and so we can call the tune. We can say to the customer, you either do what we want or there's nowhere else for you to go. The railroads did it. The electric companies did it.
The alarm clocks are doing it. We talked about alarm
the
clocks.
auto companies used to do it. And now the computer companies and the others like them are doing it. And, once again, the people who suffer, the little companies who can't compete suffer. This is a very old story, and we're running it again.
You know, it did raise a slight alarm bell or a slight bell in me that both Republicans and Democrats are, bipartisanly looking into when both parties are willing to compromise in one area when they're not in any other area. It certainly sounds a bell that something's not quite right. You know, they want to look into, I talked about at the top of the show that Republicans really want to look into this, and I would imagine it's because small businesses who are on the web are in Republican districts, especially if, they do have access to the internet or are in a rural community where they, if you're in a rural community and you do have access to the internet, you can have a much broader selling audience, than you would if you just had to sell brick and mortar style.
Right.
So
absolutely, but not to make anyone depressed, but let's be honest here.
Let's be honest.
Most of the time that these kinds of investigations have been run, they have been mainly public relations events. They have been designed exactly as you point out to give certain constituencies, small businesses, people in rural areas, a variety of people, at least the impression that their elected officials are doing something. The Trump administration has been cooperating with big business on a scale we've hardly seen in our history. It's so extreme, starting with that tax cut back in December of 2017. So they need, especially with an election coming up, to look as though they are at least a little bit not so much cooperating with big business, going after them. And whoever's the big monopolist, the big player of this game at the moment, is then becomes the target. The real risk here is either that nothing will be done or that it will take umpteen years and then they'll get a slap on the wrist. This is often what has happened in the past. They have enormous amounts of money, as we know. They will hire armies of lawyers to slow this, to stall this, armies of public relations people to make that look like what they're doing is beautiful and not ugly and has all kinds of benefits and not costs. I mean, I could write the script with a virtual 100% certainty of how this is going to play out.
No, I think that's really important for us to know. We've seen this before. Can you give, off the top of your head, any examples of, last time we saw this?
Yeah, let me give you two. We once had, not that many years ago, a single telephone company in the United States, AT&T. It got so bad that they were abusing so many small businesses, so many big businesses, the public, by charging crazy amounts of money for long-distance phone calls
I remember
and
those
so forth,
days.
that we broke them up. It finally got to the point that we broke up AT&T into, I think it was 7 regional telephones. That's where things like Verizon and so on were born. But the irony is, after all of that, if you look at the actual telephone business, it remains highly concentrated. What Verizon in its area or the other ones in their areas are doing is on a regional basis replicating what they once had as AT&T on a national basis. And indeed, there have been calls recently by the union that was striking at Verizon to look into this. Another one is the automobile business. We once had a situation where Ford, General Motors, and Chrysler were all that was left, and they were cutting very interesting deals because they had so much power. That's how they got through many years ago the 25% tariff on light trucks, so that the United States car companies could produce these light trucks and charge a high price because we were not allowing foreigners who produced the same quality trucks at a much lower price to come in. We were hitting them with a tariff. The minute they had that protection, the car companies went to work to give Americans a PR program that says if you're a real man, you have a pickup truck. And that wasn't because there was something sexy about pickup trucks. It was because they could make more money off of pickup trucks with that tariff protection long before Mr. Trump did this sort of thing. And that's another sign of monopoly, when they have a few enough companies to get together and put pressure on the politicians. So, yeah, we've seen this game over and over.
Richard, excuse my cynicism, but I guess it ain't cynicism if it's true. So I was thinking back to Microsoft and Bill Gates, and at one point in time he was saying, I don't really take part in politics. I kind of stay away from all of that. And then they went after him, and the first thing that he did was start sending all sorts of big bags of loot to all of the politicians. So I'm wondering, maybe I'm being cynical, but is this just a shakedown where you mentioned the lobbyists and all of that? They're going to come to Washington and they're going to drop money on all of the Congress people and the senators and all the other folks, and then this is miraculously going to go away. I mean, is this just a shakedown? Is that all they're doing, is trying to get some money?
I wouldn't go so far as to say it's just a shakedown, but your story is 100% on target. That will be now. That will happen. And by the way, it's not just that the companies will send the lobbyists with the bags of cash, which they will do, because they've been doing it all along anyway. Facebook has to protect itself against all the accusations they face. Google, Amazon, that's part of it. They have an army of well-heeled lobbyists that they give monies to. But unfortunately, I have to tell you that the Russian goes the other way, too. There are lots of politicians looking to get reelected in tough situations who will let it be known to these companies that a big cash infusion to their reelection effort will have wonderful effects in little obscure committee meetings of the Congress, where they will vote in such a way that slows all this down.
Which is why we need to elect. First of all, it would be nice to have some campaign finance reform, but second of all, electing people who are only taking small contributions. That's a good way to avoid all this, because then they're not beholden.
Yeah, precisely because we've seen this game before. You have to understand the politicians know all too well what this game is, and putting them under the squeeze is, in fact, for many politicians, an opportunity they're not going to miss to curry favor with these companies, knowing how much money they have. Look, I mean, we were not that long ago treated to another version of this. When Amazon announced it wanted a second headquarters, 1,000 cities across the United States got on their knees begging with huge offers of subsidies.
Yes,
we had
begging.
one here in Queens, as you know. That's the way this game is played, and it's not played any different way when you get these accusations that they're functioning as monopolies, which people know they are, because that's the way capitalism works. It just goes from one industry to another, depending on where the state of so-called competition is in each industry.
So there was some success in breaking up AT&T, even though it's come back together like that liquid monster in Terminator 2. That guy, the police guy who just you keep shooting him and he keeps sucking himself back together. So what are the things that made that breakup successful that we can maybe apply here?
Well, it's usually a question of the political mood in the country. If there were, and I guess time will tell us, if there were enough mass sentiment, if big organizations in the society really got behind the notion that these technical giants are like the phone company was, which, by the way, was also called a technical giant, or like the car companies were, or like the Philadelphia cigarette companies were, etc., then you might see the sense among the politicians that they better not do more than delay and slow and calm it down, but they better do something dramatic, or else the people will see what a charade this all is. Mm-hmm. If there were enough of a sentiment like that, building up from below, if unions began to say, hey, we know from the inside, we work for these companies, they need to be broken up. If churches said it, if you had a mass movement, then you would see the politicians feeling that heat. They would then go further than the, let's call it, gentleman's agreement, which will govern what they're doing now, if there isn't such a movement.
We are speaking with Professor Richard Wolff, Marxian Economist, Professor of Economics Emeritus from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, plus more. We could go on for 40 minutes with your very distinguished bio, but he is also the host of Economic Update with Richard D. Wolff on WBAI right here, Fridays at 6:30 p.m., which is not only here, but reaches across the world via 70 radio stations nationwide, Free Speech TV, YouTube. Professor Wolff, what is coming up on your next show?
Well, we're doing a variety of shows, and I wish I could tell you exactly, which I can't. I apologize.
Well, you never know what could happen between now and Friday that you're going to have to deal with.
Absolutely, yeah. And I've gotten a little gun-shy about predicting exactly what you're going to see.
Sure.
But our basic program is, I think, gives you a kind of a menu. The first 15 minutes of the half-hour show are me going over specific things that are hot in the news right now, whether it is like these tech giants being confronted about their monopoly position or something else. And the second half is we go into depth in a certain kind of way with a topic, or we have a guest that we interview. And I think it's a way, if I could say so myself, to keep up with a critical perspective on what's going on in the larger economy, that if you're interested in economic issues and questions, this is a program that will give you an angle on them you won't hear ever in the mainstream media.
Absolutely. Professor Wolff, we've been asked to open up the phone lines while you're on and allow people to call in with questions. People have asked me specifically because they want to call you during your show hour, but because that's not part of the show presentation and you're not live at that hour, that they want to do it here. Would you be able to stay with us for a couple more minutes and maybe allow the listeners? Okay, so let me give the listener line out in case you have a question for Professor Wolff. 212-209-2877. You may make a comment and allow Professor Wolff to respond to your comment as well. Again, the number is 212-209-2877. We're going to take a brief musical break to allow your calls to come in. You're listening to Waking Up with Juliana and King in the morning here on WBAI 99.5 FM. We'll be back with Professor Wolff taking your questions. Look at that board is all lighting up. Okay, we'll be right back. What a great song that is. It's the Google theme song. I want it all. You're listening to Waking Up. I'm Juliana Forlano.
With King listening to Queen.
Nice. High five. Nice. Okay, we have callers calling in. We are speaking with Professor Richard Wolff, and we are opening up our phone lines, as has been requested of us while he is here. 212-209-2877. If you want to call in, make a comment or ask a question. It doesn't have to be necessarily full-on related to Google. It could be any kind of economic question. Caller, you are, I know who this is. Thomasina, is that you?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi.
Guess what? I worked for Verizon for 20 years before I became a teacher.
Wow.
And so I experienced this whole breakup, the Judge Green, AT&T. I went through the whole thing in 1981.
Wow.
What I don't understand, again, as a teacher, Dr. Wolff, the Sherman Antitrust Act has been in place for, I think it was 1898.
Since Sherman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Did I?
No, you said
I'm sorry,
it.
did I say?
No, you said it.
Okay,
I just made a joke. Go ahead.
So it's interesting how we have this law in place because we knew during Carnegie, Rockefeller, and all of, the robber barons, we knew that it was wrong to have such a concentration of corporate wealth and corporate power. And we have this law, and we don't use it. So I'm just curious to know, why isn't this law being really, enacted? Well, I know why, but, how do we let them get away with that?
Thomasina, thanks. Great question. Professor Wolff.
Yeah, it is a super good question. 1890, the Sherman Act. 1914, the Clayton Act. Two major laws that did exactly what Thomasina said, that were designed at the great wave of what was called populism then, forced the politicians to go beyond clucking their tongues about monopoly and beyond the fake speeches and even beyond the fake hearings that didn't go very far. They actually passed a law. But here's the problem. What the law said was you should not do this. But this is a law that is a little bit like telling the sun with a law, you shall not come up in the morning. That's the way the planets work. The sun comes up. If you don't change the basic system of competitive capitalism, it constantly produces and reproduces these problems. The law could be used to stop it, but even then, what you're doing is you're passing a law which every few years in one industry or another will have to be applied because the system keeps producing this problem. And if you have politicians and if you have big companies who begin to learn what these laws mean, they will take the steps to get around those laws.
Sure.
You haven't changed the underlying system. You can't expect the law not to lead to people figuring out, okay, in the past we got away with this stuff without a law. Now we have to figure out new ways to get around it with the law, which is exactly what they've done. But you're right, the law remains, and it could be used by an assertive set of politicians either to beat back this kind of event or to add or amend the laws to make it more successful. But in the end, if you don't change the underlying system, you're going to continue to have these kinds of events, and with clever lawyers and big pots of money, getting around the law has never been enough to hold them back.
Professor Wolff, what changes to the underlying system would we need to see?
Well, you've got to deal with this fundamental problem. Capitalist corporations are in it to make the money. They succeed if their profits are high, and they fail if their profits are low.
Sure, but the criticism of anything other than capitalism is it dampens competition. Like, why would anyone want to give you a very high-quality phone service if they're only going to come up against some wall, if they're not just motivated by greed?
Well, I could imagine that human beings are clever enough. The most of the history of the human race, we have not had capitalism. We haven't had it before. We can get by without it as well. If we want to make sure that technology advances, that's what we do. We make sure that happens by establishing good training centers for scientists, giving them the facilities to work, giving them rewards when they do a really good job. But the notion that we have to give some company vast amounts of money to have all this happen, I think that's a kind of justification for vast sorts of money. Bill Gates, that King referred to earlier, he did his interesting work many, many years ago. We could have rewarded him with a really nice watch. But we don't have to give billions. We could have given billions of dollars to the Microsoft corporations for years and years, right to this minute. That's not necessary for what Bill Gates did 20 or 30 years ago. And the notion that we have to do that, that's a pretty bold demand by people who are rich, that they ought to be rich because some scientist somewhere did something. If you look closely at the big breakthroughs, they were often done in institutions that are not governed by the profit motive. Yes. For example, universities. Or, for example, government laboratories where people are not required to do something that makes a profit for an individual company. And we get many of our breakthroughs in those institutions, like universities and the government, in which the profit motive is not the dominant driver.
Excellent. We're speaking with Professor Richard Wolff. We have a whole bunch of callers on the line because we're taking calls. 212-209-2877. Caller, you're on the air. Your name and where you're calling from.
I'm George.
Hi, George.
I'm from New Jersey.
Great. Your question or comment for Professor Wolff?
It's a two-part. One, unless I'm dreaming, about a year or so ago, Governor of New York State, Cuomo, announced that any businesses that were applying for contracts to do business with the New York State government would be barred if they were participating or advocating for the BDS in Israel. Number two, number one. I wondered how Professor Wolff feels about that.
George, let's give Professor Wolff a moment to respond to that question. Great question. Professor Wolff, did you hear that?
Yes, I was able to hear that.
Okay.
If I understood it correctly, he was asking about the ruling about a year ago that he thinks Governor Cuomo of New York made, that the state would not do business with any company that was participating in the boycott of Israel.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Right.
Did I get that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Could
Well,
I
I think,
add one thing? Could I add one thing? I wondered how Israel feels about the pressure of such activities, his interpretation of how much pressure Israel feels.
George, let's let Professor Wolff respond. Thanks.
There's no question that, the easy part of his question is the last part. Israel is affected by the boycott, which is a global effort around the world to respond to Israel's policies in relationship both to its Palestinian citizens or citizens of Palestinian origin and to the whole part of the world, particularly in the Middle East, that opposes the expansion of Israel beyond its earlier borders or even opposes Israel being there altogether. And so there has been this boycott, a kind of a nonviolent way to put pressure on Israel to change its policies. And various countries, various companies have either supported or not supported that effort, as have local governments around the world had to make that decision. So I'm assuming that Mr. Cuomo came under considerable pressure, as I assume all the governors of all 50 states did, to take some sort of stand against that, precisely because it does affect Israel in making its business around the world harder than it would otherwise be, or less profitable than it otherwise would be. This has been a weapon used in a variety of situations. The last one that people might remember was a similar kind of boycott organized against the apartheid regime in South Africa, when political authorities and private corporations were asked to join in a boycott as a nonviolent way of putting pressure on the white government in South Africa to at least moderate, if not get rid of, its apartheid discrimination against the majority African population down there. This periodically happens. I'm not sure what the questioner wants me to say about it. This is a struggle that begins with Israel's internal politics, what Israel has chosen to do inside its society with its two different populations, the Jewish and the Muslim Arabic populations, and it has to do with Israel's foreign policy. People around the world have feelings about that, strong feelings on both sides. They could go to war against one another. Indeed, they are doing that in a variety of ways, as we all know, if you pay attention. This is a nonviolent way, and it's one of the ways that we fight out these kinds of issues. Mr. Cuomo has decided to come down on one side of the issue. It's pretty clear to me that that's because the kinds of pressures that come on to him from the pro-Israeli side are much bigger and more powerful and better endowed than the pressure on the other side. And being a politician of the classic mold, Mr. Cuomo goes wherever the pressure is greatest or least.
We're speaking with Professor Wolff. He is the host of Economic Update with Richard Wolff on WBAI Fridays at 6:30 p.m. We're taking your calls for the next few minutes until we get to move on, and we appreciate Professor Wolff you staying on the line with us for this sort of extended period to allow folks to chat with you. Caller, you are on the air on WBAI's Waking Up. Your name and where you're calling from.
Good morning. This is Willie from Brooklyn.
Hi. Your question or thought?
Hi, lady.
Hi.
Listen, I have a question. One of the best programs on BI many years ago is the Economic Update. Here's my question: why is your program cut to 2.5 an hour? And that's what I'd like to know.
You want to know if the whole hour can go on there?
Exactly.
Yeah, Professor Wolff.
Well, let me first answer by saying I am honored and flattered that you ask the question, and you ask it in a way that suggests, at least to me, because I want to believe it, that you would like to see an hour program. To tell you the truth, so would I. I would like to be doing this for an hour. And there's only one reason why not. So it's real simple. And I'm afraid that reason is that old problem, money. It costs money to produce a program like this. And we spend more time than I wish we needed to raise the money, to be able to do the research, assemble the program, get the audio engineer to prepare everything and get it over to BAI and the other stations around the country.
Everyone in the
Juliana
studio here
told
is
you,
everyone in the
it's
studio here
also
is
video, right? And
we're all-
BAI has that problem. If we were able to raise more money, believe me, we would enjoy going back to an hour-long program, and we would do it in a heartbeat.
Excellent. Well, hopefully that will happen. I mean, people are coming back to WBAI. People have been longtime listeners of WBAI, and we appreciate anything you can do that you do to bring notoriety to WBAI and the work here. Thanks for the call, Willie. Any other callers, Michael? Yes. Caller, you are on the air. This is probably going to be our last one. You're on the air. Hi.
Hello?
Hello. Who's this?
On the air?
Yeah, you're on the air.
Okay, let me turn my radio off.
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Wolff, I have a question that's, well, maybe a topic in a way. It's not really political, but I guess everything ultimately is. It's about marketing. How do some products, like let's say, for example, GE is a good example, not really a very good product anymore. It used to be, but it isn't anymore. How do they get distribution of their light bulbs in every store in the country? In other words, if you go to a really good hardware store, you might find 3 different brands of light bulb. You'll find Philips, you'll find Westinghouse, you'll find GE. And I always buy anything but GE, because everything I've bought by GE the last few years just fell apart. So, but if you go to the bodega, you go to the supermarket, you go to the grocery, they will only have GE. How does GE get that distribution?
The answer, again, luckily for this question, is
Great
simple.
question.
And the answer is advertising. The GE spends, like the other big companies, an enormous amount of money making sure you hear about, see advertisements for their particular brand over and over again. They want you to think that GE is somehow synonymous or equal to light bulb or toaster or waffle iron or whatever it is that they make. That's their job. And what that means is that every little bodega, every little store in every little town has to have that. They don't want the experience of someone coming in saying, I want to buy a light bulb, being shown that part of the store, saying, well, where's the GE? And have the local store say, well, we don't carry that, but let me tell you about all the other brands that we carry. They don't want that experience. They don't want the risk that that customer will leave. They want that customer to have the feeling that if they go to that store, they will find what they're looking for. And what they're looking for is what they've heard about on TV, on the radio, on the back of the magazine cover. So it's all about the advertising. And that's, by the way, goes back to the beginning of today's show. That's how a company becomes number 1 or number 2 or number 3. They drive everybody else out of business because all the little companies, many of whom can produce a light bulb way better than GE, haven't got the budget to make sure that their light bulb is in the store so they can have the experience you had of discovering what's the best use. So in order to avoid competition, big companies spend a fortune on advertising. On the 4th of July, the head of GE will give a speech about how wonderful competition is. But every other day of the year, he's busy making sure that he has no competitors. Advertising is how you do that, to convince people that that's what they should be looking for rather than something that might be a whole lot better. And you can see how well it worked for GE, because even after they long became a poor producer, they could still sell billions of those bulbs because of the advertising they had done and they continue to do.
We're speaking with Professor Richard Wolff. Professor Wolff, thank you so much for joining us today, and I apologize for the rest of the board, which is all lit up, that we're kind of out of time for taking the questions. So thank you so much. I do really appreciate it. You can listen to Economic Update here on WBAI, 6:30 p.m. on Fridays, and you can find Professor Wolff all over YouTube, which is fabulous, and a bunch of other radio stations, depending on where you are. So thanks again for joining us. It's always a pleasure.
Pleasure for me, too, Juliana and King. I really do enjoy talking with you and look forward to the next time.
So do we. So do we. Okay, we have our, if you're watching on the air, by the way, this is Waking Up on WBAI 99.5 FM in New York. It's 69 degrees and lightly raining in certain areas. going up to 78 degrees. We're in the peak of hurricane season. They're watching some stuff in the Gulf, but it doesn't look like anything is blowing up right now. Thank goodness. We're going to be having Jack Devine on our program or in a moment or two. Now, yesterday when we started playing the intro music for the other show, the stream got cut off. So if that happens and you happen to be watching on online, we're just going to say goodbye now. But I'm going to do it. You know, we're gonna test it. Let's see what happens. Up. Oh, this is definitely real music, so it's not gonna work. They're gonna cut it. Okay, I hear you, Alana. I see what you're saying. Oh, this is driving forces. Oh boy, what happened? Oh boy, King. Jack, we got the wrong music. Oh my goodness.
It's okay. I can ride with it.
Yeah, everybody wants to rule the world. That's a good song, but not for socialists. We're like, let's share and stuff, right? Isn't that kind of?
Well, everybody at the same time.
Yes, exactly.
Well, that's a good one.
Jack, I appreciate you coming on the air, and I apologize for the kerfluffle there. What's going on?
No worries. Thank you for having me.
No problem. What's going on at 5?
So this week, Lee's Issue will be hosting. I will be on the sideline, so we're going to be talking about the Con Ed blackouts, the hearings that happened in the last couple weeks about potential municipalization of Con Ed and public ownership of the institution instead of how it's privately run now.
Can we do that?
As
think
well
that's a
talking
possibility?
about. Yes, it's a real possibility.
Wow.
It's actually potentially underway in San Francisco right now, and there is public ownership of utilities in other parts of the country. And if you look at it, it tends to be more efficient, cost-effective, less likely to cause disaster. And that's operating within an overall capitalist environment. So that's just the beginning of the possibilities.
Well, that sounds good. What can people do who are interested in, supporting that?
Well, if you tune in today at 5,
You're going to tell us.
Lee and the 2 members of the DSA Eco-Socialist Working Group who will be there or will definitely give you all the information you need to how to plug into the campaign, how to just get involved in any way that people want.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jack. I appreciate you joining us on the program just to tell us about this stuff.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
No, it's great. The show is Revolutions for Minutes on 5 p.m. here on WBAI. We hope you had a great day, and we hope you woke up here with our show. I like how Professor Wolff was like, well, I don't mean to be depressing, but yesterday we decided, he said, but I'm going to be truthful. But that's why people tune into WBAI. And yesterday we kind of decided that perhaps our audience is savvy enough to recognize that knowing the truth, even if it is slightly depressing, doesn't mean don't be active in your day. Don't be active in your moment. And that's what we try to do here on Wake Up.
Yeah, I'd rather have the truth than to be lulled to sleep.
Oh, that's not the name of our show.
No.
Lulled to sleep.
Truth or sleep.
Juliana Furlano. King, what are you doing tonight?
I haven't figured that out yet, but I might just edit some things I've been looking to edit for a while.
Oh, we're looking forward to those
but
things.
I think I'm going to go to a meeting of some folks who are working on Rikers Island stuff because, that's still a hot topic.
Still hot.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
still going on.
And it's great because we need to cover it here on WBAI because when you listen on New York One, you don't necessarily get the whole 9 yards. Oh, there was something else I wanted to tell you about before we hit the end of the show. And King, did you have something you wanted to announce as well?
Oh yeah, because when you were
Let's get
speaking
the
about tonight, so that Zimbabwe has been a country in contradiction. When we think about Robert Mugabe, who recently passed away at the age of 93, was the longest ruling person, I think, in the history of the world. And the contradictions where early on he refused to negotiate with imperialist forces. He was a leader of a guerrilla movement that got independence. He brought in competitive independent movements into the government to rule as a coalition. and brought in education, sanitation, and all of these things on behalf of his people, and then had his reputation kind of marred by the final years of his time, the final couple of decades, where it kind of moved into despotism. But at any rate, there's an event that's going to be happening tonight at Sister's Place, 456 Nostrand Avenue in Brooklyn, that's going to take a look at Zimbabwe and all the contradictions, and they're building towards their September 21st action at the UN, because one of the things that the present regime is doing in the U.S. is they're bringing sanctions against Zimbabwe for trying to do land reform, where the white settlers are still holding land that should go to black folks. So anyway, show up there
and also
tonight
today,
at 6 p.m.
6 p.m. And also today at 6:30 p.m. at the First Unitarian Congressional Society. COSECA New York City is doing a nonviolent direct action training, closing the camp, along with Close the Camps in New York City and Earth Strike New York City. This is going to be ahead of the September 14th action to close the camps here in the city. You can go and learn about principles and the practices of nonviolent direct action and how to effectively carry out protests. We definitely need that. You can check out the website there at closethecampsnyc.com. Again, that one is today at 6:30 p.m. First Unitarian Congressional Society. Thanks for listening. We're having, I just really enjoyed the show today. Tomorrow on the program, Alexander Kaufman, climate reporter, and Rhonda Hansen. Join us.